But we are in the middle of a series on prayer. Prayer is something that we could use right about now, right? It seems like there's a lot of things in life that we can be praying about. And so when we were thinking about like what is the series we're going to talk about, prayer seemed like a very natural thing as we're waiting for this school year to begin, as we're waiting for life to, we say, go back to normal or go back to whatever it is that we're expecting into the future. Prayer just seems to be something that we could talk about and that would make sense for this time in our lives right now. So we started off 2 weeks ago. Josh launched our series, and he talked about how to pray. Like, what's the instruction? What's the basic guide to the way that we pray? Last week we talked about the relationship of asking and prayers are. How do you ask for things in your prayers, and what do you expect when you ask? But today, I'm wanting to step back just a little bit from that and go to something a little bit more basic, which is simply, do we do it? Do we actually make space in our lives to pray? Because the reality is, it can be hard to pray. Like, we believe in prayer, we want to pray, it talks about it in scripture a lot, we know prayer is a good thing, but it can be hard to actually do it. And there's lots of reasons for this. I mean, one is that we can be very busy people. Do you ever wake up in the morning and you think, mornings, like, that's my prayer time, that's when I'm going to pray? Because that seems like something that we're taught a lot of times, that's when is a good time, a good way to start your day. But do you ever wake up in the morning and you want to pray and you think, this is what I should be doing with my time? But as you sit there, as like you come out of your bed, maybe you sit on a couch, maybe you have like a chair that you pray in, and as you're about to pray, your mind immediately rushes to the rest of the day. Like, you think about the things that are coming, you think about the stuff that's piling up. If it's the school year, you're thinking about the assignment that you didn't finish last night. If you're a working person, you're thinking about the job, and you're thinking about some of the stress, and you're thinking about some of the things going on. Sometimes it's just the stuff that's going on, the drama in your life, some of the relational things going on in your life, and your mind immediately goes to all this other stuff, and it's hard to like actually pause and think about, am I going to pray? Like, can I actually sit here? Because every time that I sit here, I feel like I'm wasting the moment away because I could be getting something done. Or as I sit here and I try to pray, my mind is going in so many different directions. I can't find the focus to do it. Then there's other things too. Sometimes we have kind of emotional baggage. Sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's anxiety, sometimes it's different kinds of fears or anger or frustrations. And you want to pray, but you just don't know if you have the right words to pray yet. And then other times it's just pure boredom. Like, you sit down to pray, and then this thing dings. You think about this thing in your pocket, and there's a world of entertainment out there. And to sit there and be completely still and silent when you could be watching Netflix seems like a real downer. And so, like, as I think about all the reasons, all the barriers to prayer, I feel like every single one of those are things that I personally identify with. These are always things that I struggle with when it comes to actually making time to connect and pray with God. Yet at the same time, I feel like prayer is important. Well, actually, that's not even true. Like, as I say that, I think there's a lot of times I don't even feel that, right? Because the feeling sometimes feels more like maybe I'm just wasting time. But I believe prayer is important. I believe it's an important component of our walk with God, if for no other reason, because when you look at the life of Jesus, he kind of relied on it. When you read through the Gospels and you see the life of Jesus, he is praying all the time. He has a big decision that he needs to make. He's deciding his core leadership team, for example, and he's choosing his disciples. What does he do before he chooses them? He takes time, significant time, to pray about that choice. When Jesus is facing uncertain things and he's facing challenging times, whether it's like the temptation in the desert or the crucifixion, what does he do before that? He spends time in prayer. And then when it comes to like the busyness of life, Jesus is always busy, it seems. He has a huge demand on his shoulders. He's literally saving the world. But it seems like when things get the busiest, that's when he leans most into prayer. So this morning I want to think about that example a little bit. When we look at the life of Jesus and we look at the way that he makes space for prayer in his life, how does that relate to the way that we make space for prayer in our life? And so with that, I want to go back to the book of Matthew, and I want to look in chapter 14 for a short passage there. Matthew chapter 14, starting with verses 13 to 14. It says this, it says, as soon as Jesus heard the news, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds heard where he was headed and followed him on foot from many towns. And Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. So the context here of the story, if you look back just a little bit previous in the chapter, the news that Jesus hears that moves him towards being alone in this time is the death of John the Baptist. Now, I imagine from reading through the story of Jesus, I imagine this is a huge blow for him because John the Baptist isn't just family, it's his cousin. But it seems to be that John the Baptist is one of the few people on earth who kind of gets who Jesus is and what he's about. So he has this person that he's close to, this person that he's related to, this person who seems to understand his existence, and John the Baptist is killed. And it seems to be this moment where Jesus is gutted, where Jesus is actually feeling a heavy emotional response to the situation. And his response then is to withdraw and to go to be alone. As we look at the rest of the passage, it seems like the aloneness that he's seeking isn't just simply to be in solitude, but he's seeking a place to connect with God. He's seeking a place for prayer. So in other words, when Jesus feels an emotional burden, when Jesus feels something that's draining his soul, his response is to lean into prayer. I feel like for a lot of us, that's not always our immediate reaction. That's not our instinctual response. Sometimes it is, but sometimes when you feel something heavy, when you have some kind of emotional weight on you, it's hard to know exactly the words that you want to bring to God. Have you ever been frustrated with God? Have you ever had some kind of disappointment that's come into your life and it makes it hard to actually connect with God because you want to pray, you think maybe that's the right thing that I'm supposed to do, but what do you say when you have something that's making your heart ache? What do you say to the God who it seems like he could have changed the situation? He could have been ruling in a different kind of way. He could have been interceding and saving the life of John rather than letting him die. He could have been saving the relationship with you were in rather than letting it fall apart. He could have been saving the job that you were in rather than letting you be laid off. He could have done all kinds of things to intervene in whatever the situation is that you look at. And sometimes because of that emotional baggage that we have, it's hard then to go in and have the right words when we talk to God. I like the children's stories. I feel like this kind of checks off this little point for me. There's not much else to say after what Matt was saying. Because sometimes you have something like that where you have news about your dad and his health, and the only word that you have to say is help. You see, I think sometimes when it comes to prayer, we are waiting for the right words to say. And maybe more than that, we're waiting for our heart to be in the right place before we feel like we can actually come and connect to God. But maybe we don't actually have to wait for that. Maybe we can just come to God exactly where we are, with all of our frustration, with all of our anger, with all of our worry, with all of our insecurity, and we can just come to God with the simple word, help. It strikes me that when you look throughout the Bible, it seems like prayer isn't necessarily a polished thing where we come to God with all the right words. Prayer isn't this thing where we just come to God with this sort of like idea of, oh, God is God and he's in control and as you will, God, and then I can just completely relax because I'm already at peace before I come to God. Rather, we come to God to find that peace. Or we come to God not even sure what we're going to get out of it. When you look through the Psalms, there's all kinds of records in the Psalms where there's these heart-wrenching prayers expressing exactly what the prayer is feeling. So I want to look at one of them. If you turn to Psalm, actually a couple of them. If you turn to Psalm 50, let's start with 88. Psalm 88, verses 8 through 10. It says, "Are your wonderful deeds of any use to the dead? Do the dead rise up and praise you? Can those in the grave declare your unfailing love? Can they proclaim your faithfulness in the place of destruction?" As you read these words, you're hearing someone who's praying a prayer of frustration. someone who's praying, who's feeling like maybe God isn't having the effect on life that they hoped for. And you kind of expect there's going to be some kind of resolution in this. Like sometimes you read through Psalms and it's like someone's crying out to God, maybe even complaining to God, saying, God, where are you? And then it'll end with something along the lines of, but I will trust you still. Or I will trust that you will remain in control, or something along those lines. And that's what we kind of expect. This psalm just simply ends with verse 18. You have taken me from my companions and loved ones. Darkness is my closest friend. I always wonder if this is one of the psalms that the Israelites at some point were singing in their gatherings. Like, is this something that they would say together, this kind of refrain? You have taken away my companions and my loved ones. Darkness is my closest friend. See, when we look through the Psalms, we find this raw honesty. And we see that's a portrait or a snapshot of what prayer can be. A simple, honest dialogue of what you were feeling, and you express that to God without any kind of pressure on your part to try to resolve the feelings that you have. Going on, there's another text in Psalm 58. It gets even more explicit, where you see raw feelings coming through in the Psalms. And this is talking more about anger towards someone else. Psalm 58, verses 6 to 8. Break off their fangs, O God. Smash the jaws of these lions, O Lord. May they disappear like water into thirsty ground. May they make their weapons useless in their hands. May they be like snails that dissolve into slime, like a stillborn child who will never see the sun. It's not a polished prayer, except for maybe the snails like dissolving into slime. That's a little polished. But like this, like when you read through the Psalms, you see this over and over, is this process of someone who is praying out to God and just simply laying bare their hearts. So when we have some kind of baggage, when we have some kind of emotional block to connecting with God, perhaps we can find the best example is through the Psalms, where we just simply come to God as we are and we say what we feel. It's a therapeutic process just to simply let God know, this is where I'm at. I'm mad. I'm scared. I'm frustrated. I want something bad to happen to this person. That's how I actually feel right now. And I'm praying to let you know, this is where I'm at. And if you can't even say those words, you can find that prayer in the Psalms to simply read through and let that prayer be your prayer. I like a quote from Eugene Peterson, who is talking about the Psalms and the way the Psalms pray. But I think this speaks to just any of our prayers. He says this: our prayers, whether clumsy or skilled, heretical or orthodox, verbatim from the Psalter or ad-libbed from a sinking ship, get us no merit with God, nor are the Psalms necessary to validate our prayers as genuine. God hears anything we whisper or shout, say or sing. Right words and correct forms are not prerequisite to a heavenly audience. Maybe when it comes to prayer, we don't have to wait for our heart to be in the right place. We don't have to wait for our words to be well, like authentic or perfect. We just simply come as we are and say what we feel. And God takes our words and deals with them himself. I don't know what Jesus was needing to pray when John the Baptist died. We don't know what kind of conversation he was looking to have from God. But we do know it's an example that whatever it is that you go through, whenever you have something that's oppressive in your life, you can simply go to God with that prayer. But then comes the really frustrating part in this story. Frustrating is in, like, I try to imagine what it's like to be Jesus. I try to imagine having that burden, that sense of like that emotional weight, and he goes off to be alone. But as he does, the crowds hear where he's headed, follow him on foot from many towns, and he sees this huge crowd are waiting for him as he steps off the boat. This would be one of the most frustrating situations. If I was Jesus in this moment, and I was going through the mourning of a loss of a close friend, as I'm sailing across the sea or this water, and I see this crowd gathered, I'm pretty sure I'd put the boat in reverse, right? This is the moment that you just back up and say, okay, this is the wrong landing spot. We can find somewhere else downstream a little bit. This isn't the right place to be. Like, have you ever had that moment where you want to be alone Have you ever wanted to find some kind of solitude, but you were not able to find it? Anyone here a parent? As a parent, you have that moment all the time, right? Like I'm remembering what it was like when my kids were a bit younger. I feel like it's gotten better now. But there were times when my kids were younger where sometimes, especially when Valerie would go off to work and I was left home alone with the wild children, where sometimes I just wanted a moment of being alone. Because it seems like when you're a parent of young children, you feel like they're always there. And there would sometimes be these moments where the sanctuary of the house was where? The bathroom. And you go to the bathroom and you're like, oh, peace and quiet. You shut the door, you're alone. And it just feels so good to be alone for a minute, because if you have younger children, what do? They follow you there. They just barge right through the door and they break that silent moment and interrupt you while you're sitting there. It's not very fun. We don't like being interrupted when we're seeking solitude. Or maybe for you, maybe you're still living with your parents, and it actually has kind of a reverse thing. Like there's sometimes when you are, say, like a teenager coming home from school, and all you want to do is be alone. Maybe it was a bad day. Maybe you had like a bad test. Maybe there was like a breakup in a relationship. Whatever it is, when you walk home, what do? You want to go straight to your bedroom because you want some privacy. But what happens when you do that? You walk in that door and your parents accost you with a quiz, the daily quiz. How was your day? What did you do today? How was school? What was it like? What did your teacher say? How's your girlfriend doing? I broke up with my girlfriend. Like you have these things happening. You just want to be alone, but you can't. And so you make your way to your room. Now imagine this. I want to take that example a little bit further. Imagine that you had a really bad day. The relationship failed, the tests failed, everything failed. You just want to go home to your bedroom. And you walk in through that door, and not only are your parents there, but your uncles and your aunts and your cousins, and it's a surprise birthday party. Like I feel like that's what it would be like to be Jesus in this moment. Like you just want to be alone, and there's a crowd there waiting for you. But Jesus' response is he's moved with compassion. Jesus' response isn't to shun this group, but to lean into this group, which brings us to another thought on prayer. Prayer doesn't separate us from the world around us. Prayer isn't an isolation exercise that prevents us from making contact with the world around us, but it brings us deeper into the world around us. The word here for compassion is my favorite kind of Greek word in the New Testament, which is splanchnizomai, which basically means to be moved deep within your bowels, which sounds really weird to our Western ears. Like, you don't want to be moved deep within your bowels. That's kind of gross. But for them, that was the seat of emotion. Why? I don't know. Why is the heart the seat of our emotion? But for them, the bowels was the seat of emotion. So to be moved deep within your bowels meant that you had this deep, visceral, gut-wrenching response that moved you into some kind of action. And in the New Testament, as you read through and you see this word pop up here and there, it's never used for anyone else but for God. Or if you're reading like a parable, a God character. So for example, in the story of the prodigal son, when you see the father and he's standing there and he sees his son from a distance, it says that he's moved with compassion for his son. It's at that moment that he runs toward his son. Because when you're moved with compassion, it moves you to a place of action. And so when Jesus sees this crowd before him, it's not just simply this moment of, they interrupted the thing I was about to do. I guess I have no other choice, which you've probably been there at that place before, right? Where maybe you weren't planning on helping someone with someone, but they just kind of enter into your life and you have no choice. And you just kind of like, with a bit of resentment, you help them and you work with them, but you're like, I really wish I wasn't here right now. But for Jesus, that's not what he's feeling in this moment. He's been moved with compassion. He has deep empathy because he feels something inside about these people, and he feels like he must help them. He needs to help them. He wants to help them. And maybe I'm taking a bit of a leap here, but I wonder if this regular prayer life of Jesus was part of what brought him to that place. Was it the prayer life of Jesus, that constant connection with God, that allowed him to actually feel that kind of emotional connection with the people around him? Because wouldn't it be something if we could find that if we connected more with God, if we leaned more into conversations with God, wouldn't it be something if we could grow something in our hearts? If we could feel more empathy with the world around us? What if when we see things that are taking place within our cities, if rather than critiquing those things immediately and saying, all this destruction, all this pain, all this stuff that's happening there, and saying this is bad, this is evil, what if our first instinct was to say, why is it that people are acting out in hurt? Why is it that the city is burning? What is the pain that is causing the destruction? What if we had more empathy for people who were hurting? On the other side, what if rather than saying, man, why are these police officers making these things worse? Why are they saying things that are not helping the situation? What if we were moved to a place of empathy where we said, what would it feel like to be under the pressure and the scrutiny that they're feeling right now? You see, if the world around us who continues to fracture and grow into these different groups, what if the world around us had more empathy in their lives? But what if we as a church, what if we as followers of Jesus were connecting with him in a way that we were moved to a place of compassion for people around us? What if when someone is struggling at school, they're isolated, they're not being welcomed into the student body, what if that was a moment that we felt we were moved to compassion? And it hurt somewhere deep inside to a place where we felt like we needed to do something about it. When we see someone who's hurting in our community, when we see someone whose marriage is struggling or who's failing at work or struggling to keep a job, what if we were moved to a place of action? Because through our connection with Jesus, he was changing our hearts from the inside out, and we felt things that other people were feeling when we saw them, which then moved us to action because we felt empathy for what they were actually feeling. Of course, it goes on here because in this moment, when Jesus has this interruption, this doesn't completely derail his prayer life. In fact, it seems like, in a way, this seems anti to the idea of making space with God, right? Because I guess at some level, it seems like if Jesus was really committed to praying, that at that moment he would say, you know what, crowd? I'll get to you later because I'm kind of busy right now. I have a scheduled appointment in prayer. Wait here for a moment. But it gives me a little bit of peace that in this kind of situation, Jesus is flexible. Because there's lots of times in life where you say, like, this is the new journey that I'm going to take. I'm going to start this prayer life. And then you sit there and you wake up in the morning, you sit in that chair and you're ready to open up your Bible and you're ready to connect with God. And then what happens? Your kids wake up at the same time and they start pestering you. And sometimes we could just say, you know what? You sit over here. I'm going to connect with God. Or we could meet their needs and continue to still be committed to meeting with God. And here in this moment, what we see with Jesus is that he pauses, he's moved with compassion, he connects with the people around him because prayer draws us into the world. It doesn't remove us from the world, but then he still takes action. After he feeds them and heals them and goes through all of that, I'm going to jump down to verse 27. In verse 27, it says that immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent people home. And after sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. And the night fell while he was there alone. See, Jesus, after he takes this time of healing, he's very responsible for his actions in this moment to still create the space with God. The first thing is immediately. He doesn't wait for the right moment. The second that he's done with this healing moment, he immediately insists, there's a directional response to disciples where they don't have much choice. You must go over this way. He insists that they go to the other side of the lake, and then he sends them home. I feel like when it comes to our prayer life, when it comes to connecting with God, we need to just sometimes simply do it. There's a lot of times where we feel like maybe I just don't feel like it today. Or maybe I'm just kind of busy today. Or maybe there's a lot of things that kind of came my way that I wasn't expecting. I was expecting to pray in the morning, but then something came up and I just didn't get to it. I wasn't able to get to it. But Jesus takes action to make sure that he's creating that space to do what he knows he needs to do in his heart. And this is, by the way, striking to me as well, the fact that Jesus seems to rely on prayer not just for other people, but for himself. It's not like for Jesus, he's simply an effective prayer. It's not just that he's able to pray for other people and it makes them healed and makes them better, makes them more whole. But Jesus seems to rely on prayer himself as a way of life for his own operating abilities. And if Jesus, of all people, relied on prayer in order to be effective in his life, I kind of feel like maybe I should rely on prayer too. Like if Jesus couldn't get by without prayer, maybe I need a bit of prayer in my life too. There's a quote by Philip Yancey talking about fitting prayer into the busyness of your life. And he says this, he says, I'm learning that prayer need not be productive in the normal sense of the term, which, by the way, I think productivity is perhaps one of our biggest hindrances in our Western culture when it comes to prayer, because prayer doesn't seem like a very productive act. And we're obsessed with productivity. We're obsessed with getting things done. And prayer doesn't feel like it's getting things done sometimes. And so in our Western mindset, sitting and pausing for a sustained period of time doesn't seem like a good idea. But anyway, he says, I'm learning that prayer need not be productive in the normal sense of the term. I spend most of my waking hours trying to make it through the designated tasks for that day. Prayer offers a time to set aside that list of concerns, or rather to present them to God, to relax, to let the mind roam freely, to drink deeply, to insert a pause in the day, to trust. And then a strange thing happens, though. I find that when I reserve that time, I become more productive. I make clearer decisions and fewer impulsive mistakes. I waste less time worrying, and I seem less bothered when things go wrong. In other words, his day simply goes better, or his days go better when he pauses to have that time. What if we were more willing to pause for moments of prayer in our life? What if we were more willing to take action to rearrange our schedule when need be and to create that space in our day whenever and whatever that looked like? Would it change the way that we operate it in the world around us? Would it change the world around us? The thing is, I feel like when it comes to making any kind of lifestyle choice, whether it's exercise, or diet, or being more studious, or what have you, most of us want to go from 0 to 100, right? We want to go from a place of inactivity to 100% where we want to be. So when it comes to New Year's resolutions, for example, right? Like what happens when we pass through the new year? We say, you know what, I'm tired of being the slob that I've been. I'm going to change my life immediately. I'm going to join this gym. I'm going to show up every morning at 5 a.m., 1 hour of workout every single day. And that lasts for a solid, 3 days. Some of you are maybe more diligent than me and you make it an entire month. But at some point, you just feel like this isn't sustainable anymore. And I feel like when it comes to prayer, we're kind of like this as well. When it comes to prayer, we sometimes get convicted. We're like, you know what? I see Jesus the way he prayed. He separated himself. He went up to the wilderness, wherever that was, and he prayed the entire night. So I'm going to pray at least an hour every morning. I'm going to make it happen. And then pretty soon we realize we're not doing something that feels sustainable. What if when it came to prayer, we were willing to just make a small adjustment in our life right now? What if you prayed just a little bit more than you're praying right now? For some of you, you already have a very real scheduled prayer life that's very effective and good. But maybe there's a place where you can grow in that. Maybe there's a way you can pray more honestly with God. Maybe you can pray more expansively with God about bigger things and broader things. There's a way for you to grow in your prayer life. But for some of us, we're waking up in the morning and we're getting started with our day, and the day goes by and we go to bed at night and we haven't created that space for God. Maybe for you, that prayer life just starts with an incremental change. Maybe you get up just a few minutes earlier than you did before. Maybe you just decide to do something a little bit different with your routine to incorporate prayer into it. Maybe it's just that when you go running in the morning, you now pray while you run. Whatever it is, I feel like God is calling us, inviting us into a deeper relationship with Him. And as we begin to participate with Him and make these small adjustments and changes in our lives, they can continue to grow from there into something more. So I want to challenge you this week. I want to invite you this week to think about what your prayer life looks like right now. To think about what are the things that have stopped you from going further with it. So maybe it's the first thing that we talked about, where it comes to the emotional baggage. And maybe for you, it's just a moment where you need to say, God, I'm going to start just simply telling you what I feel. I'm going to be honest about my frustrations and my anxieties, and I'm just going to spill this out to you. Maybe for you, your invitation is to stop closing all those feelings in and expressing them to God instead. Or maybe for you, it's needing to actually be more expansive with your compassion with people around you. Because sometimes when we're not being compassionate, when we're not being empathetic with the people around us in a real world, tangible way, though it doesn't sound even connected to prayer, it's actually blocking us in our prayer lives. And for you, it's a moment of saying, you know what, part of my prayer life is actually stepping into the life of someone else around me. Or maybe for you, it's simply saying, I'm making an adjustment and a commitment in my day. Maybe I'm going to pray an hour. Maybe I'm going to pray just a couple minutes, but I'm going to do it consistently. I'm going to do it authentically, and I'm going to connect with God. I want to invite you this week to take it seriously, to move into prayer, to recognize that if Jesus needed prayer, we need prayer, and to simply grow in your walk with God. Let's pray. Father, prayer is such a weird thing. We know we're supposed to do it. We know we're invited to do it. It's hard to know where you're at sometimes when we're praying, yet we believe because of the life of Jesus that prayer is effective, that prayer is meaningful, and that you're always listening, whether we have good words or broken words, a pure heart, or even sometimes a hurt heart. You still hear us. May we lean into that relationship more and continue to grow in our walk with you. We pray in the name of Jesus.